Last night, Tucker Carlson described the indictment of Donald Trump as the total destruction of the American justice system. And I like Tucker Carlson, and he's mostly right. But I don't think he's seeing the big picture. The destruction of the American justice system has been happening for quite some time, and I would say it's become complete rather some time ago. The indictment of Donald Trump is just a glaring red flag. On 5/29/2020, thousands of far-left extremists attacked the White House and St. John's Church, and it wasn't just one night. It was actually several nights. The attack was so severe, the president and his family were ushered into an emergency bunker. This is all confirmed, and I'll show you all the receipts. The far-left extremists set fire to St. John's Church. They set fire to a guard post. They tore down the barricades in front of the White House, and this persisted for several days. There has been no grand hearing. There have been no hunts by the FBI to take these people down and bring them to justice. For the most part, I'm sure some people have received criminal charges, but it's just not notable. Most people don't know that 5/29 even happened. They don't remember. They didn't hear about it in the news. Now, we joke about fiery, but mostly peaceful, says the corporate press. But the reality is right now, there are people who walked into the Capitol building on January 6th, on the east side of the building where there was less violence. I believe it was the east side. On one side, there was bad and tremendous violence and rioting. Those people should be criminally charged, in my opinion. On another side, there were people who were let in by police, as evidenced by the individuals who have been acquitted of all wrongdoing due to evidence showing they were being waved in by police. But some of these others have been convicted. Some people who walked into open doors of a public building not knowing that it was restricted in any way are facing months and even years in prison. This is evidence, and this shows there is no American justice system. But you see, Tucker, what we're witnessing now with the indictment of Donald Trump is something far worse than just the destruction of the American justice system. As Tucker does point out, this is the president targeting his political rival. My friends, we're entering pre-Civil War in the literal sense, or quite possibly even the advancement of civil war. And I know there's a lot of questions around when we are in a civil war, what a civil war will look like, what does it mean? And we don't know. We don't. I looked back at the history and I've read quite a bit about it, especially living in Harper's Ferry in a Civil War area. There's history all around and there's historical context, there's signs, there's artillery. And I thought to myself, when did they know it was a civil war? Because how would you, right? How do you know what you're looking at when you first arrive? I've long thought about the discovery of the Great Lakes, what it must have been like to be a European settler for the first time making your way to Lake Michigan. What, would you think it's the ocean? They probably knew right away because it was fresh water. It must be a lake, but they didn't know how big it was. They didn't really know what they were looking at. Now, when we look back through history, we call it the discovery of the Great Lakes. Now, I know Native Americans were already there and they knew all about it. My point is, for the European settler who did not know this existed when they first approached it, they didn't know what they were looking at. So they didn't write down, we've discovered the Great Lakes. They've discovered there's a large body of water here. I wonder what it is. A few years later, they said, we've surveyed all around it. Man, this thing's massive. For the American Civil War, there was the first Battle of Bull Run, I believe it was. There was the firing on Fort Sumter, and questions about when the Civil War actually began and when did they actually start calling it a civil war. In fact, most did not call it a civil war. Most did not refer to it as a war. How did they know when they marched towards that first Battle of Bull Run that it was a civil war? In fact, they did not. They didn't even have the troop levels required for actual full-scale war. They did not know. But hold on there a minute. We say that was the first major battle of the Civil War. We say the Civil War started with the firing on Fort Sumter. But why? Was that because it was the first time there was physical conflict between the factions? Perhaps. Well, we've already had that, haven't we? I mean, we have the federal government locking up people who, many of them, walked into a public building clueless as to what was going on. We have people who are in prison right now without a trial for years. It's been years since some of these people have been arrested. Now, don't get me wrong. If you riot, you should be arrested. But come on. Engaging in a riot outside of a building where you had no idea what was going on, bad. You shouldn't fight cops. You shouldn't try and storm into a building, all of that stuff. But you do have a right to a speedy trial. It's been 2 years. Some of these people have been in solitary confinement since then. That is the weaponization of government. So maybe, fair point, we're not talking about civil war just yet. Maybe we're talking about revolution. But what about all of the violence we've seen so far with the far left political faction engaging in overt terrorism? Well, fair point. We don't call Bleeding Kansas civil war. Bleeding Kansas was a conflict that occurred in Kansas before the Civil War, but it was the precursor too. It was several years of fighting in Kansas over whether or not it would be a slave state or a free state. Very famously, John Brown and his family were engaged in conflict there in terroristic and murderous activities. Though many people do look at John Brown as a hero of some sort, I find it interesting that he just went around basically killing people and engaging in terroristic acts. Granted, there's questions about when we cross the line as to moral evils like slavery. I get it. But the point is, with everything being done by John Brown, we didn't call that civil war until there were two discernible factions shooting at each other. But again, my point was, at the time when all this started with the Battle of Fort Sumter, they didn't call it a civil war. They didn't even call it a war. Eventually, they called it the war between states. In 1862, they started to refer to it as a civil war. The Supreme Court called it a civil war, but that's almost a full year after we view historically the war having already begun. So perhaps, my friends, it is not fair to say we are in civil war, but let's talk about where this goes. It was about, what are we looking at? 6 years ago. No joke. 6 years ago. I tweeted 5, and then I pulled up the article, and lo, it was 6. 6 years ago, I entertained the possibility of civil war coming to these United States. And why? It's because I read an article in the New Yorker that said some people view the likelihood of civil war in this country in the next decade at 95%. And some said 5%. But the consensus of all these different national security experts was 35%. And I said, is it really possible? Because you had people fighting in the streets in large numbers. You had the tearing down of statues, cultural revolution. And I was told by many people, it will never happen. You're insane, Tim, they told me. Prominent conservatives in group chat saying, you're nuts. The security state will never allow a civil war. Just because wingnuts are fighting in the street does not a civil war make. And I said, it's not about that. It's about the fact that these politics have been expanding and consuming more and more elements of our government. It is reaching higher and higher levels. And I was told I was wrong. Sure enough, as of yesterday, we see that the culture war, which was silly to some 10 years ago, has reached the highest level. The president of the United States has had his chief political rival arrested. And of course, leftists and liberals will make every excuse possible as to why it's justified. But all dictators do. Do you think Vladimir Putin has no justification for the arrest of Navalny? Every single dictatorial leader or authoritarian or despot will create some justification, some criminal act for why they must stop their chief political rival. And you may be arguing, but Tim, Trump did it. Okay, I'm not going to argue with you on that point. I'm simply going to tell you right now, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you think Trump is right or wrong. For the purpose of this statement I am making now, what matters is that you have two worlds in this country. One in which Donald Trump is innocent and being persecuted by an evil cabal of corporate elitists, corrupt government cronies to stop a man who wants to save this country. And in another world, you have the rise of a Hitler-esque figure who has a cult behind him, who are bigots, hateful, and evil, and will turn this country into a fascist dystopia. Now, of course, I fall on clearly one side of these camps. I think y'all are nuts if you think the latter. Donald Trump is certainly not Hitler. Donald Trump would not even invoke the Insurrection Act to stop the attack on the White House. He would not invoke the Insurrection Act to stop the riots all over the United States. He wouldn't do it. But there are elements of our intelligence agencies who lied about Russiagate, who lied about Ukrainegate, who withheld evidence that Joe Biden may have been bribed by a Ukrainian executive into firing a prosecutor. And we know that Joe Biden publicly admitted he went to the president of Ukraine and said, if you do not fire the prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, that he would withhold congressionally approved loan guarantees. Now, all of that is fact. The bribery scandal stuff, let's see what the evidence holds. But the fact remains, these two worlds exist. And whether or not you agree with me or know the facts is not material to whether or not we are facing a real civil war or complete social breakdown. So perhaps it is not fair to say that civil war has started because maybe we do need that Fort Sumter moment of actual conflict. Maybe we're still 10 years away from it. The period in the United States that led up to the Civil War actually took decades. In fact, you could argue it started with the formation of this country, when the Declaration of Independence initially had one line in it arguing against slavery and was removed out of fear that southern states would not join the fight for independence if it was clear that many of the founding fathers wanted to end the institution. Eventually, there was talk of civil war in the early 1800s, and it bubbled up in 1861. But here we are now. There's still a whole lot to be said and so much more data to show you. Let me start by showing you this quote from Tucker Carlson, and then we'll advance from the past to the present, what's currently happening. Tucker Carlson says, the Biden administration arrested Donald Trump this afternoon. They had arraigned him and fingerprinted him in a Miami courthouse, like the accused felon he now is. These are the first steps in a process that is designed to put Donald Trump behind bars for the rest of his life. Cable news carried every moment of it live. It's unprecedented, they told us, with what looked like shock. But they weren't shocked. They knew this was coming. Everyone who has paid attention knew it was. What just happened was always going to happen. It's been inevitable since February 13th, 2016. What matters then and now is foreign policy. The invasions and occupations and proxy wars. The decisions to determine which global populations will thrive and which will die. The policies that come with trillion-dollar price tags, the ones that over time have made the counties around D.C. the richest suburbs in the world. In Washington, that's what actually matters. And it's obvious when you look carefully. When there's a debate about anything else, for example, the debt ceiling, both sides take their assigned positions and they start yelling. But when Congress decides to start a war, no matter how foolish or counterproductive, or obviously disconnected from America's core interests that war may be, when that happens, the leaders of both parties automatically jump behind it like circus clowns. Now, Tucker Carlson says it's the destruction of the American justice system. But I think it's way worse than that. I think this is precursor to civil conflict, revolution. I don't know. I wonder where this goes and how it begins. Donald Trump is arrested and charged in New York, now federally in a Miami court, and soon to be Georgia. Do the Trump supporters in this country who genuinely believe, and there's many of them, 70 some odd million who voted for the man. I wonder how many of them are fervent. Probably not that many. Do they just sit back and say, I guess this is what has become of my country? Or do we see January 6th-like situations arise? At what point do we start slowly talking about factions taking control? At what point do we then refer to it as a civil war? What you need to understand about what's happening. It won't be overnight. And that's my point with the entire opening of this segment. It will not be overnight. We'll look back historically and say it may have started here, or otherwise. We may say the Occupy movement was the beginning of the culture war. We may say it was Gamergate. Who knows? But I'll tell you this. A fight may break out, and you'll say it's just a fight. And then 50 years later, they say that was the start of a civil war. January 6th, for instance, they may say that was the start. We don't know, because we don't know exactly what it is we're looking at. Fort Fisher has been covering testimony by January 6 defendants and individuals present. In this one thread I find particularly interesting, John Strand will soon begin a 32-month prison sentence. He says he was only there as a security for Simone Gold, who herself has served 60 days. John Strand has put together a short video explaining his prosecution. He was offered a plea deal. He rejected it. He said it was because the government was lying. Right. Now, we can look at the president being indicted and call that the total destruction of our justice system. But I think when the average individual is denied a fair trial and the jurisdiction itself is tainted and you can't get a fair trial, well, I think it's fair to say civil war At least the Civil War period is here upon us. Now, we know all about the Civil War with the caning in Congress and the escalating tensions. None of that was considered the Civil War. It was pre-Civil War period. And maybe that's what we're facing right now. I'd like to take you back in time to where it all began for me. From the New Yorker. Is America headed for a new kind of civil war? By Robin Wright, August 14th, 2017. This is an article that I read that had me questioning whether or not it was really possible. This was based on what had happened in Charlottesville. They began to ask this question. I'd like to read for you this paragraph. Well, I should go back so we can get the name. This is Keith Mines. Earlier this year, I began a conversation with Keith Mines about America's turmoil. Mines has spent his career in the U.S. Army Special Forces, the United Nations, and now the State Department navigating civil wars in countries like Afghanistan, Colombia, El Salvador, Iraq, Somalia, and Sudan. He returned to Washington after 16 years to find conditions that he'd seen nurture conflict abroad now visible at home. It haunts him. In March, Mines was one of several national security experts from foreign policy asked to evaluate the risks of a second civil war with percentages. Mines concluded that the U.S. faces a 60% chance of civil war over the next 10 to 15 years. Other experts' predictions ranged from 5 to 95%. The sobering consensus was 35%, and that was 5 months before Charlottesville. This article was written 6 years ago. In 2017, I read it following what had happened in Charlottesville. Shortly after that, we got another article. I shouldn't say shortly, but 2 years. Princeton professor. We are in a cold civil war. Now, it became a trope. People would jokingly say, whenever Tim talks about civil war, drink. And I think it is fair to raise these warning signs. When I first entertained the prospect of a civil war, many people, as I mentioned earlier, said I was nuts. People would joke when I would bring it up in videos saying, you're crazy. Okay. We are now at the phase of societal breakdown and conflict where the sitting president has ordered his DOJ. I should be careful about how I phrase this. The sitting president's administration has arrested their main political rival and the frontrunner for the Republican Party, Donald Trump. When you know for a fact that you cannot get a fair trial in a certain jurisdiction due to the political leanings, when Donald Trump is indicted in, say, New York, we know how New York is a jury pool in New York will react. Miami may be different. Georgia may be different. But the powers are lining up against the American people long before they came after Trump. So I'll stress it again. Cold civil war, the prospect of civil war, it's all beginning to happen. Perhaps it ends here. Perhaps the arrest of Donald Trump is the wake-up call. But do you know how many times I have made this statement? You get one major political moment. A man in Portland, Aaron Danielson, shot twice in the chest by a man bearing a Black Lives Matter tattoo on his neck. And I said, could this be a shot heard round the world moment? A man killed in public? Maybe not. And I always preface everything I say with this. Maybe this is the wake-up call. Maybe this is the moment people say, enough, it's gone too far, the escalation must stop, and we snap out of it and narrowly avert some kind of major civil conflict. I say that every single time. And maybe this time it's true, right? Maybe this is the moment, President Trump being indicted federally by the president's administration. First for this country. Maybe this is the moment people say, enough, it needs to stop. Sorry if I don't believe it. I'd love to believe it. I would love to preface my statements by saying it. But I believe, considering that I've said it every single time, the likelihood that this is the moment where people stop the escalation is slim to none. Donald Trump has vowed when he's elected, he will appoint a special prosecutor. The seal has been broken, he said, and he's going to go after everyone, and he should. Look, I have my viewpoints, same as everybody else. At the macro level, I can say two factions are engaging in escalating conflict. I happen to be on the side of one of them, same as everybody else. There is no middle ground. There is a corrupt element in this country that doesn't care for the destruction they have wrought. They don't care at all. Let me see if I can pull up this story to give you an example of where my mentality comes from, and then we'll go back to the timeline on Civil War. Task and purpose. NewsGuard certified 100 out of 100. Top U.S. official admits lying to Trump on American troop levels in Syria. That's right. Quote, we were always playing shell games to not make clear to our leadership how many troops we had there. Outgoing diplomat Jim Jeffrey told Defense One reporter Katie Bowe Williams in an interview. America's top envoy to the multinational military coalition to defeat ISIS claimed in a recent interview that he routinely lied to senior government officials about U.S. troop levels in Syria. That's treasonous, in my opinion. I mean, look, convict him in a court of law. But this is where my mentality comes from. Donald Trump saying the American people don't want to be involved in foreign wars, and these individuals lying to you, to me, to the president, to make sure U.S. troops stay on the ground in a foreign country, in a country we did not declare war on. That is the corruption of this nation. It's not the only one, but it gets worse. Now let's go back to after the Cold Civil War article. Science says half of Americans anticipate a U.S. Civil War soon, survey finds. The Guardian, these are the conditions ripe for political violence. How close is the U.S. to civil war? And then finally, this article from Politico, the threat of civil breakdown is real. National security officials are still not prepared for a far-right revolt. April 21, 2023. The fear of the conflict, it's here. The New York Post says Georgia cops scope out Trump proceedings in Miami ahead of Atlanta indictment decision. Here we go. I am asked, what should we do if Trump really did break the law? And my response on Twitter was that it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Hillary Clinton was not indicted for the destruction of public records. So now you want to say Trump should be indicted under Espionage Act and national security files and all that stuff? Why? Sure, anyone who breaks the law should be convicted. The Atlantic, how Team Obama justifies the killing of a 16-year-old American. Nothing? That's it? Really? The first federal indictment of a president is over mishandling of national security documents? I mean, that's bad if it's true. But Obama killed an American kid, bombing a civilian restaurant in a country we're not at war with. When Donald Trump first came into office, he ordered a commando raid in Yemen, which allegedly resulted in the death of an 8-year-old American girl, the sister of Abdulrahman al-Awlaki. I believe that should be investigated. We don't know the details 100%, so I can't say with certainty it's true. It's allegations, but they should be investigated. And if true, Donald Trump absolutely should be held accountable for that. But there's a reason they don't go after Trump or Obama on these charges. Now, to be fair, Obama did kill an American citizen. That's confirmed fact. As for the Trump commando raid, that's not yet been confirmed or investigated, only alleged. But I will say straight up, if he did it, charge him. But they won't. Because the real reason, as Tucker Carlson points out, for the targeting of Donald Trump and you, the American citizen, is that they want war. They've always wanted war. They want a liberal world order. That's what the CFR calls it. So if it comes down to Trump or Obama killing Americans in their American bloodlust overseas, they're not going to charge anybody for that because that would inhibit their ability to wage more war and press for some kind of twisted global dominance. Now, they believe they're the good guys. They believe they're stabilizing the world, but all villains do. Every villain is the hero of their own story. We don't live in a comic book where Lex Luthor just wants to destroy everything, doesn't care about humanity. No, everyone thinks they're the good guy, but these people are evil. And they'll justify why they're good, and they'll say, if you only you knew. And I'll respond with, I understand there are other countries that are evil. But the act that you engage in, the actions you've taken that destroy this country from within, that's evil. The grooming of children. Even the Biden administration was forced to ban these trans activists who engaged in lewd and lascivious behavior in public at the White House. And they defend it all over the world. So no, the only thing I see here is evil. Obama kills an American citizen and they do not charge him. Why? As I mentioned, they want the war. BleachBit. BleachBit stifles investigation of Hillary Clinton. press release from BleachBit, an open source program that can purge your servers. And they are effectively gloating that when Hillary Clinton destroyed public records, BleachBit made it so that it couldn't be recovered. Made it very difficult to prosecute. But we know she did. I mean, even Snopes has to admit it. Did Hillary Clinton smash her phone with a hammer? Mixture. One of Hillary Clinton's aides told the FBI that on 2 occasions he disposed of her unwanted mobile devices by breaking or hammering them. That's illegal. That's the destruction of public records. Hillary Clinton didn't personally do it. And my favorite from the 2016 election cycle. Fact check, says NBC News. Trump says Clinton acid washed her email server. She did not. What? Here's the claim. Trump says Clinton acid washed her email server. Nope. Oh, really? She didn't? The truth. Clinton's team used an app called BleachBit. She did not use a corrosive chemical. The purpose of this tweet is that people will only see the headline, not the full context. And the headline is that Trump lied, Trump was wrong, Clinton didn't do it. When Trump said she acid washed her server, he did not mean she literally poured acid on a computer. What sane person would think that's what he meant? She used BleachBit, a software, to purge. Clinton's team used an app called BleachBit to erase public records. The private email server that she had housed public records, including top secret documents. Fact. No criminal prosecution. Because what we're seeing, my friends, is pre-Civil War conflict inside our country. The question becomes, when will militia rise? When will military break? There's a viral clip of a comedian. I guess he used to work for the Chappelle Show. He's making a joke about the NRA versus the military. And he's like, so you get 100 NRA guys and then one military guy who's like, I have a drone? They're all kind of clustered together. I guess I'll just press this button. Did I win? Many on the left and many urban liberals seem to think that civil war can't happen because Trump supporters could never beat the government. Well, these people haven't read a history book. That's never what happened. In the American Civil War, the generals on both sides were West Point graduates. Or I shouldn't say the generals. I should say prominent military leaders on both sides had graduated West Point, trained in the same place. And a question arose whether or not they would be loyal to their state, who voted democratically to secede within the state, or they would be loyal to the federal government. And that was the big challenge. I present you with a potential scenario. There is a military base in one jurisdiction that's given orders. The commander of that jurisdiction is a moderate, slightly right-leaning individual. Or I should say the commander. I don't want to be overtly specific on military rank, but let's say the ranking officer of some faction of military personnel is given an order that they feel they cannot oblige. Let's say that there is a state, and in this state, let's say Florida. Let's entertain a possibility in the indictment of Donald Trump. The federal government has indicted Donald Trump. He went to Miami. Florida is an interesting place for this to happen because it does open the door for a lot of potentialities. Let's say that Donald Trump is convicted in Florida. He is in Florida. They are ordered to remand him to custody. In Florida, Ron DeSantis, or whoever is in charge at the time, probably DeSantis, says, we will not be involved in this. We will not. Now, Ron's already said this. I believe he could issue a stronger statement of, we will defy you, instead of just leave us out of it. But let's say the federal government says we need local law enforcement to assist and state law enforcement to assist in the apprehension of Donald Trump, who is just convicted on federal charges. And they say no. The federal government will then be tasked with going in to this state. Can that really happen? And a lot of people think it can't, but of course it can. It is absolutely within the realm of physical reality. Trump could do a backflip. I doubt it. He's an old man, but it's physically possible. I'm not talking about aliens coming and abducting anybody. I'm talking about the real world where it's entirely possible Trump gets convicted. And then they say to federal officers, take him into custody. Local law enforcement then says, we are not doing it. And then a question comes up. With everything we've seen with Bud Light, with Target, with Starbucks, and the culture war, we are seeing now defiance as it pertains to the leftist ideology and political faction. Why? Well, people are scared. People are scared. What happens if a federal law enforcement agent is ordered by their superior officer in D.C., go bring in Trump? And this guy shows up and there's a crowd of people saying no. And the cop says, I can't do it. I can't do it. I will not become a social pariah. I will never be able to live anywhere ever again. My life will be over if I'm the one who takes Trump in. And so he says, no. And they say, you will be terminated for insubordination. And this officer says, being fired from my job is safer for me than being targeted and threatened in a major national conflict with a former president. What if? What if no law enforcement officers will do it? What if the crowd of Trump supporters guarding him and law enforcement officers saying we won't allow this? What if the federal government says we are going to go in and get Trump whether you want it or not? What happens when then there is a ranking military officer who's instructed under the Insurrection Act to stop the insurrection currently taking place to protect a federally indicted criminal at a large scale? What happens if riots break out? Biden invokes the Insurrection Act, and then you get military saying, we will not. What happens? Now, many on the left believe the government will always act on these orders, that it doesn't matter where you are in the military, that if Biden says, so be it, go and arrest Trump, we're using the military this time because local law enforcement and civilian law enforcement won't do it. They think it'll just happen. Now, I think it's likely it will. I don't know. I think it's crazy to think, but it is possible. You have to understand that when social order breaks down, the question falls to the individual. What course of action preserves my and my family's lives? So ask yourself this. If a ranking officer instructed, let's say first, civilian law enforcement instructs law enforcement to arrest Trump. Some might, and it may just happen. Who knows? But there, of course, is a possibility that that cop says, all of my family are Trump supporting conservatives. My friends are, I live in a Trump supporting neighborhood. If I do this, my life is over. I quit. Wouldn't it be easier just to resign and say, I'm not being involved in this? And if that happens, what if there are other law enforcement that actually support Trump? And they do. And they say, you've gone too far. And now we're actually going to stop you. What happens if those law enforcement join protests saying it has to stop? Could happen. Maybe not. I don't know. All of these things are potentialities and they're possible, albeit they may be long shots. But if I were to tell you 6 years ago, when reading that article, that within 6 years, the sitting president would be arrested by the president. I'm sorry, not the sitting president. A former president would be arrested by the current president just before an election. You wouldn't believe me. If I went to you 10 years ago and said, in 10 years, the former president of the United States and frontrunner in a major, for the presidency, the frontrunner in the Republican Party would be arrested by the Democratic president, you'd say, shut up. That would never happen. You'd say it would never happen. So when I say now, it is entirely possible law enforcement defects, resigns, and refuses to arrest and arraign, indict, or otherwise Donald Trump on future charges or otherwise, or facing a conviction they refuse to remand, or a judge refuses to go along with the system, the social order begins to break down. At which point questions begin to come up of how does the federal government enforce laws in a state that they would argue is an active rebellion? State law enforcement won't comply. Federal agencies in that state are also refusing to comply because they live there. If you're an FBI agent stationed in Florida, you live there. Do you want to be the person surrounded by neighbors who know you are the one who went after the person they like? Will the federal government then send in the military, or will they simply say, Trump's free to go? I don't know, but it's possible. And I fear that's where we're heading. The question I asked, when did the Civil War begin? Google.com says, when I asked, when did they know it was a civil war? First, it says, when did the Civil War technically begin? At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor. Just below it, People also ask, when did they start calling it the Civil War? In 1862, the U.S. Supreme Court used the terms the present Civil War between the United States and the so-called Confederate States, and, quote, the Civil War such as that now waged between northern and southern states. At the Battle of Fort Sumter, no one said Civil War. I guess you can call it that. I don't know if it was a battle, but the firing on Fort Sumter, I believe only one person died. Nobody said Civil War. They didn't know it was beginning. It's not until after the fact. But here we are now. The War of the Rebellion. Many different names existed for it. They called it the war between states. The most common name, of course, is the Civil War, although it was rarely used during the war. In fact, they didn't even know it was a war for some time, and that's the point. I love the History Channel breakdown of how it all began. The first Battle of Bull Run on July 21st, 1861. 35,000 Confederate soldiers under the command of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson forced a greater number of Union forces to retreat towards D.C., dashing any hopes of a quick Union victory, and leading Lincoln to call for 500,000 more recruits. In fact, both sides' initial call for troops had to be widened after it became clear that the war would not be a limited or short conflict. That's right. They actually thought it would be limited or short. They did not know that civil war had begun. And it only got worse. After Lincoln called for more recruits, I believe it was 4 more states that then formally seceded because of the call. The South at the time called it they called it the War for Southern Independence. People in the North called it the Southern Rebellion. I believe it was Frederick Douglass who called it the Slavers' Rebellion. I want to bring you quickly now to this article from Wikipedia. George Floyd protests in Washington, D.C. to talk about what could be, and is, in my opinion, history in the making. May 29th. The White House was on lockdown the night of May 29th in response to protests reaching the gates. The riots began at 7 p.m. By 8:30 p.m., the White House lockdown was lifted as rioters began to leave. At 10 p.m., the rioters returned. However, by 3:30 a.m. Saturday, the rioters were more subdued. At one point, protesters were pepper sprayed. They reportedly threw bricks, bottles, rocks, fireworks, and other items. Rocks, urine, and alcohol. Secret Service agents, 60 of them injured, 11 hospitalized and treated for non-life-threatening injuries. As a result of the protests, which they previously called riots, the Secret Service rushed President Donald Trump to shelter in the White House underground bunker, where he remained for almost 1 hour. This occurred after some protesters crossed temporary barricades set up near the Treasury Department buildings. Around that time, the Secret Service alert level was raised to red. The president's wife and son were also brought to the bunker. Trump later falsely claimed he'd only gone to the bunker for an inspection, and also claimed that he was in the bunker for a tiny little short period of time. Attorney General William Barr later stated that the May 29 protests were so bad that the Secret Service recommended the president go down to the bunker. Incredible. St. John's Church was set aflame in the riots. Here's the Wikipedia. Let me see if they have so they don't have the drop-down menu to just jump, but they do mention the role in the 2020 protests. According to the church's rector, the Reverend Bob Fisher, during the protest, a fire was lit in the nursery in the basement of the Ashburton house of the church. Fisher wrote that the fire was small, destroying the nursery room, but leaving the rest of the church untouched except by graffiti. This is because the National Guard and police were able to clear out the rioters and put the fire out, but video exists of this. So when can we say it began? I don't know. Maybe it won't. Maybe this is the point where we say nothing crazy is going to happen. It's going to calm down here. It can't get worse than this. I don't believe that's true. The sitting president, Joe Biden's administration, has arrested his main political rival, unprecedented in U.S. history, and signaling only escalation is to come. Do you think Trump supporters, seeing this, will begin to trust Democrats and back down? Do you think Democrats, seeing this, will realize perhaps they've gone too far? Of course they won't. On Twitter right now, Democrats are cheering, saying Trump broke the law. He must be arrested. Are you nuts? We can't let anyone be above the law. Completely ignoring the fact that Joe Biden openly admitted to illegally threatening to withhold congressionally approved loan guarantees to Ukraine. The FBI has evidence that he may have been bribed to do so. Are they going to bring that up? So I'll tell you this. Obviously, I have my stance and my positions. But for the purpose of this video, in the history of this country, and in the discussion of where this is all going, I can only say none of it matters. There are two worlds. One in which Trump is an evil dictator rising to power. One in which he is saving America and fighting against the corrupt forces that have taken over this government, this country. It doesn't matter which one you believe, because the conflict is escalating. And the actions made by the Biden Justice Department guarantee it will get worse. But I hope I'm wrong. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel, youtube.com/TimcastNews. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all next time.